Hello, and we are live.
We're here after a little bit of technical difficulties on my end, probably.
Um, First, we want to thank America's Best Racing for giving us this platform to share our work. Um, and we want to thank everyone who's purchased our Kentucky Derby herd Dynamics report in the past and all the people who've supported our Bloodstock work. For those of you who don't know us, we are THT Bloodstock, and we help people buy horses. We help people manage race horses. And we also publish an annual Kentucky Derby herd dynamics report that is sold on brisnet.com. I'm a journalist and a handicapper, and Kerry Kerry started as a wildlife researcher. And the work that Kerry did watching wild herds of horses and a realization that it was the horses' mental abilities and how they used their emotional energy that actually led to who was a herd leader and who survived in the wild. That was the genesis to our business working
For sure,
together.
and Pete, to that point, and I did want to add a big thanks to everybody for the support of our Derby report. Like Pete said, this was the Derby report was really kind of Pete's idea, brainstorm, and we did it many moons ago, and it's really turned into something special and fun for us. It's a lot of work, but we appreciate the support through the years and people learning about our work and a chance to kind of show horses in a different way because they're emotionally driven athletes. They have a lot more to them than just the physical numbers and just the analytics and the whole personality driven type of thing going on with these athletes. And I was talking to Pete earlier this year. We were wanting to do something maybe for the Breeders' Cup Classic, and we decided to do a little give back instead of doing a full written report and putting it out there for sale and things like that. I wanted to do something as a give back to everybody, and I figured we'd do a show or a podcast or something along those lines and give our classics information out for free as a big thank you and support and share our work. And definitely appreciate ABR for letting us come on.
Absolutely. And for those of you who have not seen our Derby report before, it's a really good introduction to our herd dynamic work. Our website is thtbloodstock.com. And if you click on the big race analysis tab, all of our Derby reports going back, 12 years now, Kerry? 13 years?
Something like that. It's been a long time.
They're
Since
all
Animal Kingdom.
yeah, and they're all archived on there, so you can kind of see our work and see how we've seen the last 12 or 13 Derby fields.
And also, as you go along here, when we're finished, if you have interest in learning more about herd dynamics, because we're going to try to cover what we can here, but there's always a whole lot more things to look at and read. You can go to the blog section of that website, and I put up a lot of research papers there. So if you want to continue to expand on your curiosity of the horse herd dynamics, and like I always tell people, you can have physical talent, but if you don't have a psychological athlete, you have a lot of wasted talent. And it does take the psychological ability to execute and become an athlete, to have the emotional ability to handle what it takes to be an athlete. So that said, Pete, why don't we get right into it with this year's field, and we'll go through the horses.
Excellent. So let's just go. There's 9 horses in the Classic this year. You and I have studied them together and a little bit independently. And this is going to be pretty informal. We don't have any bells and whistles. One thing that I would love us to be able to do in the future is get the rights to race videos so that we can, say we go through the Derby preps and we can show people exactly what we're talking about. When we say a horse is inefficient in this part of the race, or we like something we see, we like how a horse handled the specific herd dynamic situation, maybe we can use race videos to show people that. That'll be in the future.
And one of my visions, Pete, we often talk about this, but way back when we used to watch Madden do his little thing with the race, with the breakdown of the football plays, it would be fantastic to get up there and do some of that for everyone, to kind of break down a race, how we go through these horses, because we're like a report like this, we're just we're just looking at video. We don't really have intimate relationship with these horses or see them on a day-to-day basis. We're not with these horses, but we're getting all this information that we give you, gleaning from studying the races. And it would be fun to share that with you and kind of break down from a herd dynamic point of view, I always say a view from the hoof of what that's like. So maybe sometime in the future we'll get to do that.
Absolutely. Hi to Sam, Richard, and Robert who waited out the technical difficulties. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks, guys.
So, all right, well, let's start. I'm going to start from the rail out, Kerry.
Yeah, that's fine.
So the number one post in this race is Tripoli. He's a 4-year-old Kitten's Joy colt. Kitten's Joy is known for being a turf stallion.
Right.
He's a great turf horse. Tripoli ran his first 11 races on the turf, and that included 9 tries at the non-winners 1X class level. Then they probably threw their hands up and said, why don't we just try this? They ran him on the dirt this summer. He immediately wins the non-winners 2X and pops a 100 Beyer speed figure. And basically at that point, a new career was born. And now we have a horse that's in the Breeders' Cup Classic.
Yeah, you know, and one of the cool things, you know, looking at that herd dynamic traits or personality traits that really is interesting with this guy is and I'll take this to where I credit maybe some Tappet family stamping involved here, but he's got that fast psychological rhythm, you know, where he expresses himself in a very intense manner with the ears pinned, and he's really plowing into space in a very determined way. But, you know, there's no template for how a horse should express themselves. You know, you don't have one certain type of psychology that expresses itself in a physical manner specifically. It's really case by case basis. And for him, you know, sometimes you'll look at a horse and we'll say ears are pinned. Is there stress going on there? What's happening with that? But in a case like this is just exactly how he expresses himself. So you can't, you can't look at something like that and say, well, you know, the ears are pinned back or something going on inside the horse. Well, he's just internalizing. He is internalizing his emotion and his stress, but his body is still fluent. You know, mind to body fluency is so important, and he has that. So, yeah, he definitely found a new world on dirt. I think that expresses well on the dirt. Obviously, it does.
Yep. So he's out of a Tappet broodmare. That's what we were referring to earlier, and sometimes the stallion, you know, the stallion and the mare contribute, but I really see a lot of Tappet in this horse. And I think one of the reasons he was able to move over to the dirt successfully is that he's a really efficient mover. A dirt surface tests a horse's biomechanics a lot more difficult than turf does. And this guy, he's got the movement to work on dirt. So after he wins that allowance race, he was second in the Grade 2 San Diego Handicap. Then he won the Pacific Classic. That's one of the most prestigious Grade 1s for 3-year-olds and up in American racing. And the interesting thing here is the Pacific Classic win was at the exact distance as the Breeders' Cup Classic. Yeah. And just like that race, Tripoli has drawn the rail. So there's actually a little bit of a template here for the connections, probably giving them a little bit of confidence of how they might run here. Now, this field is much tougher. These are faster horses, and they're better herd dynamics. But
yeah, I mean, for him, you know, the way he runs, the breakdown couldn't have getting the rail for him couldn't have been any better. I mean, it's certainly it's the luck of the draw, as they say. But as far as the environmental influences that he'll be dealing with, he's mentally fitted for that position. And he that last race, you're right, he had a template for what he's about to encounter as far as the positioning goes. Now, the herd dynamic peer pressure, this is going to be a little different story.
Right. You know, I think for me, and I do note the jockey switch here. Irad Ortiz Jr. is getting on Tripoli in the Classic, and he's the best rider that's ever sat on this horse's back. I'm classifying Tripoli as a long shot underneath contender. I don't think he really has the herd dynamic power to put his stamp on this race. But if things were to fall apart up front and they ride him like the stayer he is, you know, I think if he finished third or fourth, it would be a great success for this horse.
It would be, you know, and something about a Breeders' Cup Classic, you know, you're looking at, I mean, you can just say these are the heavyweights in racing right now. These are horses that have proven that they can win. You know, and they've all proven that they can compete against peers and so on and so forth. But now you're putting all of this, you're commingling all this together. So it's going to be different. You know, it's like the Kentucky Derby is a whole different environment for a majority of the horses ever being in there, all the horses being in there. This is going to be, you know, the field size is not going to be all that uncomfortable for most of these horses, but what they're going to encounter from their herd dynamic standpoint. And I like to point something out before we go any further. You know, horses are obviously herd animals, but when it comes to being an athlete, there isn't a whole lot of team sports, you know, unless you're plowing out in a field. So these horses are being asked to go basically against common herd nature of being in a group and wanting to outsource and be a part of that herd dynamic. So horses that have the ability to separate themselves independent of that natural herd dynamic, of that natural tendency, those are the cream of the crop athletes. That's the rare bird that they can operate independently amongst their peers. That's something to keep in mind, because you can get that's kind of a lost point, especially when you're scouting for horses. The ability to separate themselves is really important. Sorry, Pete, I went off on my usual tangent.
No, that's a really good point. And I think it's going to come into play in this race.
Yeah.
In addition to this being the hardest herd dynamic test for most of these horses, even though it's only a 9-horse field, I think this race is also going to have a physical pace that's going to be very demanding for some of these horses. For some of them, it's going to be the fastest race they've ever been in, and that puts pressure on them also, because we always talk about the physical and the mental model kind of having to match up. And you might have a horse has been comfortable doing something in a previous race, at a certain paced race, and now all of a sudden they're going to be wanting to have a similar position and fill a similar role in this herd, but this herd's going to be moving a lot faster. So they're going to be taken out of the spot that they want to be in. They're going to be taken out of their comfort zone. So those horses that are adaptable are to different pace scenarios, to different positions, are going to have a better chance to adapt on the fly and be successful in this race.
Yeah, and the upper echelon of that is horses that assimilate, gives them versatility. And, you have to keep in mind, too, that there are two types of pace. There's the physical pace, but there's also the psychological pace. And when those two things are too far apart, or they don't work in conjunction, mental fatigue can set in. So that's something to keep an eye out too for some of these horses. And mental fatigue can set in because of peer herd dynamic pressures.
All right. The number 2 horse, Express Train. He's a 4-year-old colt by Union Rags. His career, he showed a little promise at age 2 and must have gotten hurt because he didn't run at age 3 until August. And that's kind of when he showed that he could be this type of horse. He closed his 3-year-old campaign with a good second behind Charlatan in the Grade 1 Malibu Stakes, going 7 furlongs. And this year we've kind of seen his herd dynamic develop. And I think he has a nice balanced mix of competitive nature and group herd dynamic efficiency. He tries hard. He's athletic minded, and his fluency looks pretty good. My question was, in his film, was there anything that made you believe he's good enough for a Breeders' Cup Classic level race?
Right. And my question with him is that this is I look at this horse as a horse that's still on his psychological growth pattern. Every horse, and there's no timeline for this. I mean, this can happen over 2 races. It can be instant for some horses, or it can be a steady progression or an interrupted progression. But, for this horse's mental growth patterns, the herd dynamic transitions are continuing to evolve. And the big question for me is where are we on that progression? Where are we on that growth pattern? It looked like he may have be a little bit more environmentally dependent than some of the other horses, as far as learning, taking his natural adaptation process and learning to anticipate and assimilate. Because when horses begin to get experience and as they grow, the next level of herd dynamic growth is when horses begin to access their anticipatory response mechanism. This is where they begin to basically assume the environment before it takes shape, and they can read the environment and respond to it. And that allows them to assimilate instead of waiting for it to open up and adapt to the changes. So where he is on that is kind of the question mark for me.
Yeah, and I thought Express Train, when we saw him in the Pacific Classic, he was lathered up at the start. He looked a little uncomfortable. And a lot of time horses will tell us when the competition they're in against is a little too tough. They give us these little outward signs. He did run a slightly better race in the most recent the Awesome Again, where he was 3rd, beaten 7 by Medina Spirit. But for me, in the end, I think Express Train has completed a decent herd dynamic growth curve to this point. I don't think he's ready to compete for a top spot in this race, though.
Yeah, I would be surprised. But I mean, yeah. But I mean, he's who knows? I think the future is still in front of this horse. I don't think we probably not have not seen everything that's going to develop here. And sometimes maybe you have. Some horses can plateau.
Absolutely. All right, let's move on to a horse that I think can compete for the win here. Number 3 is Hot Rod Charlie. 3-year-old colt by Oxbow. So he is one of the 3-year-olds that's in this field. I like this year's 3-year-old class. I like how they're developing. I especially like the steps I've seen them taking here later in the fall. The fall of a horse's 3-year-old season is a key time for their development physically and mentally, because they're about to take on older horses. And I always like to see them getting faster and stronger at this time of the year. And I do think Hot Rod Charlie has done that.
Yeah.
And he's a horse that we already liked.
Yeah.
When we did our Derby report this year, we ranked Hot Rod Charlie 3rd, and he was a bit of a sentimental favorite. He was very athletic-minded horse, basically been on a herd dynamic growth pattern ever since blinkers were added and they sent him long on the dirt as a 2-year-old. And blinkers are actually a really big part of this read here.
Yeah, I was just going to say about that, Pete. The blinkers, before I even get into the whole blinker situation, I'd like to say this, that, we all know what a physical lead change is, but, a horse also has to do what we term a sensory lead change. They have to be able to, as they're moving through the environment, or if the environment is moving around them, they have to be able to transition and transfer. Basically, I call it a handoff in our little lingo, sensory stimulus from one aspect to the next aspect to the next aspect without having physical disruptions and not losing body control. And if they can't, a horse has to be able to identify and interpret stimulus faster than they're physically moving to maintain body control, or faster than the environment is giving it to them to maintain body control. And what that means is in racing is if a horse is moving really fast and they're trying to interpret a new stimuli, and they can't quite get it done fast enough, you'll see them kind of drag, or they'll float. They get a little floaty, like driving down a road and you like turn your head and your car goes the same way you turn your head. That kind of thing can start to happen. And they just lose a little bit of body control before they get it back, or before they finally get the interpretation down. But when you're talking about a horse is going that fast over this period of time, what we call a time in motion, you can lose a length or however many feet, you just don't know, depending on how dramatic it is. So in this case, we saw that when the blinkers came off, we saw some little hiccups in some of the sensory lead changes, some of the sensory transitions that affected the body control just enough. It wasn't overly dramatic. It wasn't crazy. We've seen a lot worse. But for me, in my opinion, putting the blinkers back on is really a no-brainer. And what it does is it kind of bridges the gap. It bridges that gap just enough that kind of can remove that little pothole in his road.
Yeah, just a quick history of Hot Rod Charlie. He ran a really nice 3rd in the Kentucky Derby. Then he runs 2nd in the Belmont Stakes. And in that race, he was sent to the lead, set very fast fractions. It was a gallant in defeat, really impressed a lot of people that he finished 2nd and really fought back against the winner, Essential Quality. Turned out to be 2nd best on the day. But that's when the blinkers came off. And the interesting thing is that Hot Rod Charlie he won both these races with the blinkers off that we're referring to here, that we saw some little things we didn't like. In the Haskell, where he defeated Midnight Bourbon and Mandaloon, he was taken down, actually. He crossed the finish line first, but he was taken down in place 7 for drifting inward and clipping heels with Midnight Bourbon. And in that race, I don't think that race alone was a sign that the blinkers were a problem, but I think it could be argued that his oblique awareness was just a little off. And as he cut over to his left to engage with Mandaloon and ultimately win the race, he just clipped heels with Midnight Bourbon, and that horse did fall. Luckily, he was fine. And Hot Rod Charlie was taken down there. He was the best horse in that race, though, on herd dynamics.
Yeah, for sure. And what can happen like that, to your point, Pete, is that, depth perception can be off for a horse that's having issues in that area, even if they're minor. And it's really not a big deal. It's not something that you would notice that much in a horse that's just walking around. But when you're in the heat of competition and there's a lot of action, the herd dynamic chaos, and things are moving really, really fast, it kind of condenses everything. And I think that could have been a contributing factor.
And then in the next race, he ran in the Pennsylvania Derby, and this is where it definitely went into the area of a behavioral overcompensation due to no blinkers. I like how Hot Rod Charlie controlled that race start to finish, and it was a really fast race. I've got a fire signal by the fraction to this race and by the final time. He showed off his big forward emotional projection while he was on the lead, but on the far turn with Midnight Bourbon in his rear oblique sensory field kind of coming up behind him, Hot Rod Charlie started drifting out, and he carried his opponent out. Now, they lodged an inquiry on that was disallowed. But there was a little bit more, actually. Then Hot Rod Charlie had this race won at the 16th pole, but then he flips back to his left lead, and he starts drifting inward through the wire. And a lot of time when horses bore in or bore out, it can be a physical thing. But in this case, it really looked like a psychological thing of just him trying to locate stimulus in that rear oblique field, and his forward efficiency was negatively affected.
Yeah, because, when a horse has to take emotional energy, emotional energy distribution is just so important, and how that is distributed through how each horse distributes that is different. But in his case, if you have to take from Peter to pay Paul, you're trying to pay attention to this area while you're moving here, going real fast, just for a split second, you can lose a little bit of space awareness. And those are they're minor things that, and I'm not an advocate for equipment, but the blinkers in this case are a great assist. It just alleviates that area for him. And I think that's a wise choice.
Yeah. So 2 days ago, we see a tweet announcement that Doug O'Neill's putting the blinkers back on. I just think it's a great decision. And for me, it moved Hot Rod Charlie back into my top 3 for the race. He specifically mentioned that his rider, Flavien Prat, recommended putting like a French cup blinker back on. So note, we love riders who get sensory awareness. Flavien Prat may get it.
Yeah, that's right.
So
riding by feel and instinct.
I always like to track what horses do after a race. So a note for people who believe in key races, take a look at what a few of the horses that were finishing behind Hot Rod Charlie in that Pennsylvania Derby have done since then. I've noted a couple big winners whose speed figures improved significantly. So I think that hot pace of that race and that final time were very legit. They stacked up really well with the rest of the races on the card. So in my mind, with the blinkers going back on, Hot Rod Charlie enters the Breeders' Cup Classic as a major contender to win this race.
Yeah, for sure.
All right. Number 4 is Essential Quality. I would say the leader of the 3-year-old division right now. His only loss was the Kentucky Derby.
Yeah.
He won the Belmont. We talked about that earlier. He won the Jim Dandy. He won the Travers. He's a 3-year-old colt by Tappet. Going into the Kentucky Derby this year in our report, we kind of asked if this was a horse or a machine, because up to that point, I mean, all he did was win races. He never seemed to get tired. His deceleration curve, as I call it, on his internal fractions was very minor. This was a horse that just seemed to be able to keep grinding and running the same pace all day. He's worn blinkers from day one. And this is not a horse who really wears his emotions on his sleeve. There's not a ton of body language. So for us, just working off of race videos, he's a little bit hard. He was a little bit hard to get to know. So I'm curious, Kerry, with these subsequent races we've seen, I mean, I'm certainly more impressed with him.
I am too. And the Kentucky Derby notwithstanding, that's for a horse, that's just a race. Okay. And for me, I look at that race as something that he really learned a lot from, because sometimes you have to be in those situations to actually hit a neck. If everything is so easy for you, if you don't get yourself knocked around a little bit and you can't pick yourself back up, you may not learn as much in combat, especially in competition. I mean, that's just how it works. And I look at the Derby as a really tough performance, and then he comes out of that and just never skips a beat. I mean, this is he used that experience, and it did not faze him. It didn't drag him down. If anything, I think it made him more confident and stronger, or or he just didn't really even think that much about it as far as mentally, bogging him down and getting kind of beat down. This horse is kind of like a mental machine. Like, Pete said earlier, his energy distribution is a steady hum. His emotional distribution is very forward. He just continues on and on and on and on. And he has a really good match between the psychological fluency and the physical fluency and, mental stamina. He just seems like he never runs out of it. And it's just, he just, don't turn around for a second. He's going to be right there.
Yeah. And I think he had a legitimate excuse in the Derby in the really wide trip he got, just from a standpoint of ground loss, but also a standpoint of having to use his mental energy to interpret open ground. When you're out wide like that and you're never covered up, that can be an exhausting trip.
It can be, and something about for him, and the way, even though he is what I would consider a fast rhythmed type of psychology, he doesn't have any wasted emotional energy. If you watch him, he's not messing around. He doesn't have any quirky body things that he does when he's in motion, and he's very steady. So the fact that he doesn't waste any emotional energy and it's not leaking out any place in the sensory system or psychology, the blinkers probably help with that. Who knows what he's like personally without that. But the fact is, his emotional energy distribution is just very, very steady. And I can see him carrying this on and on and on without really getting tired, wearing down.
Yeah. And so weaknesses, let's talk about the little chinks in the armor that we've seen in this horse. And I have two listed. One is his efficiency out of the gate. Like right when he enters a new environment, he's not always the most efficient, and that can cost him at the start of a race. It cost him a little bit in the Derby.
Yep.
He got shuffled and then he wound up wide.
Yeah, before he finds his rhythm.
Yep. And the other thing is in what we call IHD combat, individual herd dynamic combat. That is when a horse is in one-on-one competing mode. The engine is fully open and they're just going at it, competing for space, competing for herd leadership. Right when that starts, we actually have seen essential quality pushed around a little bit here and there, but he's always recovered and he never stops trying to pass the other horse. So he's a little bit methodical in his transitions in IHD combat, but he never stops trying.
Right. His emotional energy is so consistent that any chinks in the armor herd dynamically, he can overcome that, and they don't necessarily take him completely off his game because he rebounds. And these small hiccups herd dynamically, he can rebound. And so he's just he's a tough competitor. He really is. He's a tough competitor.
Yeah. And time and motion is his friend. The Belmont was the greatest, race he could ever ask for. This is 1.25 miles on what I consider to be a sharp speed track. So I think maybe Del Mar is not the greatest track for him to express his stamina, but I think this race is going to set up really well for him. And if you were doing a show pool where you were trying to bet, a horse to finish third in every race, if you got live to the Breeders' Cup Classic, I think my show pool pick would be Essential Quality because I think he's going to be rallying and I think he's going to hit the top 3.
Yeah. I have him as my third right now in my mind. I mean, he's so far, how this all shapes out.
All right, let's move on to number 5. That is the morning line favorite in the race, Knicks Go. A really interesting horse. Safe to say that Knicks Go is probably the greatest horse the Korean Racing Authority has ever bought in America. They really got a special horse here. Of all the horses we've studied, I don't know if I can think of a comparable herd dynamic to this horse. Does he remind you of anyone we've looked at before?
Nah, he's pretty unique. I mean, you just have to sit back and appreciate. This is a really cool. I mean, it's a Maryland bred. It's a cool story. It's a cool horse. I mean, this guy is just very unique and just extremely relentless. And he's the very definition of a horse that gives everything he has every time, all the time. And you just can't ask for more than that. I mean, he just is a very unique match. I think his body type matches his psychological type perfectly. And he moves like a race car. He handles like a race car. The way he corners, the way he does things, the way he executes his transitions. And his psychological operating speed is at a very, very fast spin, what I call a spin cycle mentally. And the interesting thing is he has the body type that can keep up with it and maintain it. And that's not something that you see happen too often, to be able to take that over a long time in motion that evenly matched. Excuse me.
He has a really low efficient stride. And I think that plays in and works really well with his psychology. Just a quick summary of his career arc. He was a really good 2-year-old, and he finished second in the 2018 Breeders' Cup Juvenile. He was then in the barn of trainer Ben Colebrook. He looked like he could have been a Derby horse. He did not train on well at age 3 at all. He was winless in 8 starts. He was transferred to trainer Brad Cox's barn for the 2020 season. And I mean, honestly, by the end of last year, you could argue he might be the fastest horse in America. He finished 2020 with a win in the Breeders' Cup Dirt Mile at Keeneland. And this was just a crazy race. He set fractions of 21.98, 44.40, and 108.25, completing the mile in 133.85. His half mile and 6 furlong sprints going a route were faster than they ran in the Breeders' Cup sprint on the same day.
The thing about that is, though, I mean, this horse, he's doing this and he looks so natural at it. I mean, like he's so relaxed. Like he carries it. It looks like he may carry his head a little high, but that's just a normal expression for him. But his tail is always relaxed. I mean, he's doing these things. This is his natural rhythm. I mean, he hit this mental maturity and this physical maturity, and those two things combined. I mean, he's not showing any indications of emotional stress during going that fast over that time period, and that's rare. He doesn't have to kind of refine himself. He doesn't have to refocus, nothing like that. This horse is just, once he's gone, he's gone.
And he loves to run into open space.
Mm-hmm.
Like,
yeah,
this is,
definitely.
We talked earlier about horses that are comfortable moving independently of the herd. This horse is more comfortable moving independently from the herd. He wants to run.
He just drinks in the open space in front of him. Yeah, he just drinks in.
And really, that's how he wins his races. He doesn't win his races by looking another horse in the eye and beating it with presence. He's running away from them. He's setting such a fast physical pace that it's uncomfortable for them to try to be next to him. He's running fields off their feet. And because he has sprinter speed, but they've found out that he actually has the stamina for middle distance and possibly classic distance. I think that's one of the big questions for this horse Saturday.
Mm-hmm.
He's going up against a lot of horses in these races that are not comfortable at the operating speed that he is very comfortable at.
Well, and that's going to be the thing, and when you're looking at a race like this, I think it's important. Like, all these horses have proven that they can win. Okay, we that's a given. That's a no-brainer. But so you can't look at a horse and say, how's this horse going to win, and go with it with that. I look at these horses and I say, all right, how can this horse lose? What is the area of weakness in this horse? What is going to be the antagonists, areas of the herd dynamic or the physical performance, and who amongst the peers can take advantage of that? Because that's what we know. They all can win. I mean, that's a given. So, how do you beat the horses? How's that horse? How can that horse lose? That's kind of how I look at it. And for him, my point with him is just what Pete said. It's from a herd dynamic standpoint. We know what he's able to do. He's shown what he's able to do, and it's a wonderful, awesome to see. It's fun to watch. I mean, I really enjoy watching it. But what's going to happen if he does have to go? If another horse can take on that speed comfortably and has a really strong herd dynamic and can gnaw away, that's the question mark. And then you have the 1.25 mile distance to go along with that. So there's some things there that it's not a given to me that he's just going to run away from this field. I that could happen, but that's not what I'm foreseeing here.
And there is a template in his past performances of how he can get beaten. If you look at the Grade 1 Saudi Cup, it was a 1 1/8 mile race. It was a 1-turn 1 1/8 mile. But in that race, a very talented horse trained by Bob Baffert, who I believe has since retired, named Charlatan, who is also a super efficient mover and has great speed. He beat Nick's Go to the Lead from the outside. And Nick's Go was kind of in that uncomfortable spot up the rail, not quite getting to the lead. And he appeared discouraged, and he faded to finish 4th in that race.
Yeah, he did fade, and that showed you, you know, he was discouraged herdodynamically. There was a little bit of, he got gnawed away a little bit there, and you could see it begin to affect. So there's going to be some tough horses in this field. It's, you know, he's going to have the speed, obviously, to do what he's going to do. And you know what? He may very well run away with the field. But I think that there's some antagonists in here that can chew on him a little bit, make it interesting.
Yeah, and I think there's maybe 1 or 2 horses who might try to match strides with him, but I think there's a few others who might try to beat him from close range. And I wanted to ask you about that. You don't have to be head-to-head to affect another horse's motion. Can a stalking horse that's, you know, 2 or 3 lengths back but in his space, can they wear him down?
They can wear you down, and I think that they can wear him down just enough. and the idea would be is to kind of hunt him a little bit and be off his oblique, be off the hip a little bit, or be close enough but far enough away where you're just kind of gnawing away, that you're a nuisance. You're that gnat over your shoulder that's just constantly just there, bugging me. And what you want to do is you want to, you know, kind of attack that space in a way that you're forcing him to recognize you're there, and making him use energy to try to figure out how far away you are. Because what you're hoping for then is that you begin to lose. That's how you can kind of gnaw away at the mental efficiency. The physical efficiency is what it is, but you want to gnaw away at the mental efficiency in this horse. And, you know, if I was coaching a football team, I would be looking at a player like this and how can I gnaw away and take advantage of the battle of attrition over the time and motion of 1.25 miles. And I actually think there's a horse in here that can do that.
All right. Well, let's move up. We'll find out who that horse is. Let's move on to the number 6 horse. I don't think this is the one you're going to say is that horse. Art Collector.
No, it's not going to be him.
But we do have some past with Art Collector, and we have some interesting notes on him. He is a 4-year-old colt by Bernardini. He was supposed to run in last year's Kentucky Derby. And before he scratched out of that race really late in the process, Art Collector we had studied him, and he was entering that Derby on a really nice herd dynamic growth curve. He had beaten the filly, the subsequent Preakness Stakes winner, Swiss Skydiver, by 3.5 lengths in the Bluegrass Stakes. And when we were doing our Derby report, we liked Art Collector better than the eventual winner, Authentic, and we were kicking around the idea of picking him over 'Tis the Law when he was pulled out of the race. So we had a high of opinion of this. I
remember you and I having that conversation. I was like, man, you know, I woke up one morning, I thought, I think this is going to be my Derby horse. And I was very disappointed that he didn't get the run.
The good notes that, you know, I dug up on him at that time was we had a really smooth mind-to-body expression. He was intense and competitive-minded, but he didn't hold stress. He showed laser focus. He was versatile. He adapted well to new environments. He had good body control. He had elite space awareness. It's a whole bunch of basically traits that of an elite horse.
Yeah, but really good.
After he missed the Derby, he went backwards for sure.
Yeah,
and he wrapped up the year trying to face Nick's Go in the Breeders' Cup Dirt Mile, and he looked tired in that race, and he looked discouraged when he wasn't close to the pace. One of the areas that Art Collector was really growing in at that time was his individual herd dynamic speed. We saw his pattern of motion become more and more tactical to the point where he was basically pressing or setting the fractions in every race. Now he comes back this year, one race, bad effort, and then he's transferred to trainer Bill Mott, who we have a lot of respect for, and he's ripped off 3 wins in a row. And we've kind of seen that same herd dynamic development pattern. His pattern of motion has turned into a pressing speed horse again.
Yeah. You know, and it's kind of, some horses go through transitions mentally, and they go through ups and downs, just like people do. You know, sometimes you need a change of environment, and a change of human beings, and a change of stable, and all those things can play into it. But, you know, he kind of went a little bit up and down there for a little while, but now you get the sense that he has found himself again, and that he is beginning to match his mental rhythms with the physical rhythms, and they're starting to come together again. And it looks really good. I mean, this is much more the version of our collector that we were high on going into the Derby, and what we're seeing now. The question is, what was taken away during his quote unquote downtime, down period, and how much can he get back? And this is going to be a tough test. I mean, this is obviously a really good athlete, and he has a good, strong herd dynamic. He's got a lot of good things going for him. Looks to be sensory sound and all those things, and good mind to body fluency. But this is going to be a heck of a test, and I'm not all the way in saying that I think he's at the top just yet.
I'm not either. I think he's a legit 8-1, 10-1 shot in this field.
Yeah.
One thing that concerns me is that the pattern of motion that he's been reinforcing, pressing the lead or setting fractions, these races he's been doing that in are not nearly as fast paced as what he's going to see here.
Right.
So he is either going to have to adjust to a much hotter pace up front, or he's going to have to change his running style on the fly. And that's hard to do. So
it's definitely hard to do. Yeah.
If he can revert, I do believe he has a lot of group herd dynamic at his core. And if he can revert back to that and still finish, I think he's live here. But I think there's a reason he's more in my tier 2 of the main contenders and not in the top tier.
Yeah, I have him in my tier 2 for that reason. And the thing of it is it's kind of a crapshoot. Are we going to see him revert back to some more GHD, that group herd dynamic, where he can take in the environment and hit a mental cruise control and conserve energy, and not try to expend it all at one time, and have a launching pad to go into IHD competitive zone? It's kind of a wait and see. I always look at these kind of races, like I say every year for the Derby. I look at the contenders, and a lot of times it's like splitting hairs. And any given Sunday, any given Saturday, somebody can win, of course. But if I'm looking at these horses going head to head 10 times, who out of the 10 times is going to have the majority of those wins? And not that somebody else is not going to win 6 times or 4 times or 3 times, but that's kind of how I look at it. And I don't see him winning this race.
I don't either. Maybe 1 out of 10 times. I do like
exactly.
Bill Mott in his corner. I do think that's a positive, though.
It definitely helps. Good trainer.
All right. Horse number 7 is Stiletto Boy. He's 30-1 on the morning line. I can't argue with that morning line, but this is kind of one of those horses that I really enjoyed watching the way he developed, because where he has come from and where he's gotten to now.
Yeah, he's on an interesting growth pattern, and you can really see it if you study the races and you break them down from a herd dynamic standpoint. You can see the growth pattern has been. He's got a fast IHD rhythm, and typical Shackelford. We've evaluated Shackelford as a stallion, and these mental rhythms are right in line with that. But his growth patterns have been good. I mean, he has continued, in my opinion, it's been translating athletically.
It's been protracted, but it's been forward.
Right, exactly.
It took him till his 4th race to actually successfully change leads, but that was actually a really big growth race for him.
It did, and something to that. Obviously that can be a physical or a training thing, but there's also a contributing factor with psychological intensity and sensory lead changes. Sometimes you can get so focused on one thing mentally that it affects you physically. It affects the ability to, you have to be able to multitask when you're reading the environment and do a physical lead change, and to maintain body control and to make it very fluent. And it took him a long time to kind of grind that out. It did. He's been growing grudgingly, like Pete said, has been protracted, but he has been moving in the right direction.
Yeah, and the first part of his career, his first 7 races, he's in Iowa and he's in Arkansas, but he wins the Iowa Derby by 4.5 lengths, and then he was sold privately. Steve Mosier, trainer Ed Mosier Jr. has this horse now in Southern California. They've had him for 3 races. They tried him on the turf once. That didn't work. Then they put him on the dirt and they took the blinkers off. And I actually think a new growth pattern has started for this horse. He was 3rd in the Shared Belief and 2nd beaten 5 lengths in the Awesome again. I don't think he can win this race, but I think they have, this is just a 3-year-old. And the way he's been learning experientially with a general forward moving pattern, I think he's over his head here, but I think there's could be further improvement in this horse in the future.
Yeah,
and I think they have a nice candidate. Like, I think this horse is worth tracking next year as a 4-year-old. They run that early season series of races for 4-year-olds in Southern California. And who knows, maybe we'll see him in the Breeders' Cup Classic again next year too.
Yeah, when you have a fast cycling, high revving IHD mentality like that, the growth patterns can be a little bit delayed because of the intensity that the horse has inside as he's learning to process stress. Stress is such an important factor for an athlete, for anybody. I mean, you can practice and practice and practice all you want, but when you get up on that podium and you're in front of that crowd and you got to give that speech that you practice in your bedroom 10 times, you can have all kinds of anxiety, and performance anxiety and emotional stress play a huge role in physical output. It's just a no-brainer. And I think with this horse's intensity, I think his ability to process emotional stress is a little bit delayed as far as learning how to do it, because he's a physically expressive horse when it comes to that. I think he has to process physically. So you're going to see some disruptions from time to time in his physical performances as the mentality goes. But I do think that as time goes forward, he'll hit a comfortable rhythm and he'll find a groove where he's extremely consistent. And I think it's going to be, has a potential nice future in front of him.
Agreed. There's some potential here. All right. Horse number 8 is Medina Spirit, our controversial Kentucky Derby winner, trained by Bob Baffert. When we studied Medina Spirit for this year's Derby report, we basically loved everything about his mental and behavioral traits. But then we watched him, battle gamely, but for distant second place finishes in his final 2 Derby preps. He was beaten, I think, 8 lengths by Life is Good, 4 lengths by Rock Your World. And I mean, really, he was looked like he was just close to empty, going 1 mile and a 16th and 1 mile and an 1/8 to get those second place finishes. And then comes the Kentucky Derby. He goes to the lead. He controls the race start to finish. And he showed all the things that were good, that we liked about him. And he held off everybody in the lane in what was a really amazing, unexpected performance by me.
Yeah, and my thing with Medina Spirit is that all the human noise aside, let's just take a look at the horse. And the horse really is a very high level herdodynamic by nature. I mean, this horse has, if you want to watch something fun, take a look at his races and just pay close attention to his ear articulation. This tells you so much about the horse. He'll have his inside ear straight forward, and he'll have his outside ear feeling around the environment. I mean, like the horse can multitask with the best of them. And it's really, he has outstanding natural environmental awareness. And this is a high level herd dynamic trait. This just not every horse can do that, can clear that space. So he's identifying and interpreting forward aspect. He's identifying and interpreting oblique aspect simultaneously while running however fast, miles per hour. I mean, and maintaining it with zero stress. This is not something that you see every day. So and his growth patterns are built upon that. He continues to build his herd dynamic strength and confidence up over time. And, the horse, in my opinion, is that kind of horse that has the herd dynamic strength, the space awareness, the speed, the combination of mental and physical traits. And the cool thing about him is his emotional energy distribution is just so wherever he needs it. He uses it where he needs it, when he needs it. He has learned how to do that. And we're talking about Knicks Go. Pete, I'll let the cat out of the bag. Medina Spirit is my top pick, because I think that, going head to head and considering how do you beat a Knicks Go? You gnaw away. I think that the best candidate in this field to gnaw away and to be able to maintain that physical pace with mental strength is Medina Spirit. And my vision, you can go back and forth, but one of the scenarios that I see playing out, or if I was riding Medina Spirit, I would try to do this, would be to try to just be off the hip of Knicks Go and take advantage of your herd dynamic strength, because the space awareness of Medina Spirit is so good. I mean, so good. He knows exactly how far away he is. He can just be just enough to scrap and scratch and scratch and scratch on that door and gnaw away at Nick's go. That would be fun to watch. I would love to see how that plays out, and I hope I get a chance to see that. I hope that's how it works out.
I'll add to his list of good attributes is he's one of the best gait horses we've seen this year. He's got a beautiful, long, efficient stride, and his mind to body fluency is perfect. So he not only does he have all those tools to potentially challenge Nick's go for herd leadership in some way early in this race. Baffert trained Charlatan, so he's already beaten Nick's go once, and in just about every big race we've seen recently, if Baffert has an IHD speed horse and you're going into the Derby, the Travers, the Preakness, he uses that IHD speed. He tells his jockey to be aggressive. They go to the lead. They're trying to take control of the race, and I'm confident that's going to be the game plan here for that horse.
And something about Medina Spirit's psychology as far as a herd dynamic. I mentioned earlier about the differences between adaptation and assimilation. As a matter of fact, while I'm thinking about it, if you go to THT Bloodstock website on the blog, I just wrote a paper that talks about the differences between assimilation and adaptation. But, with his environmental awareness and his sensory soundness being so good all the way around, it allows him to anticipate the environment. And when you can anticipate the environment, you can assimilate to it, and when you assimilate to it, it makes you very, very versatile. So his versatility could come into play here. He may need to be in wherever he may end up going into the hunt, but I can kind of see him assimilating to the environment, however it shapes up. And I think that gives him a good advantage.
We also have seen him control space against other horses and use his presence to influence other horses. And that could be absolutely vital. Right. If it turns out he's close enough to Nick's go to do that, I rate him higher just on a pure herd dynamic power than Nick's go.
It's going to be fun. Or it should be.
Since the Derby, Medina Spirit did come back and run in the Preakness, and he kind of ran a dud in my eyes. He was third, beaten 5.5 the Preakness. I think he bounced in that race. Yeah. I think Baffert has freshened him since.
He did. And the thing of it is, like that's not unusual. I mean, you're looking at these are, hey, listen, these are emotionally driven athletes, and there's peaks, there's highs and lows, just like with humans, especially when a horse is, he was only 3 years old. I mean, he's a baby, in nature's eyes. So these horses are still learning as they go. And there's no concise template that says, hey, because you can't lose again, you can't look bad again. Well, that's not how it works. I mean, you can have a bad day and you can learn from that and pick yourself back up. And I think he was in the middle of his growth patterns, just like he was going into the Derby. And that's what made it so confusing of which way to pick him for the Derby. So I think that was part of that process. And I think he's maturing, and I think his mind and body are catching up to themselves, and he's in a good spot right now.
Well, and he's returned with 2 really nice wins, including a 5-length romp over older horses in the Grade 1 Awesome Again. I thought he just looked beautiful the way he moved in that race. His feet were barely touching the ground in that race. There's a battle, 5 lengths behind him to see who's going to get second place. And it was like those horses weren't even there. I thought the Awesome Again looked like Medina Spirit was running on clouds and the other horses were down on the ground.
Yeah, he was in different stratosphere. Simple as that.
So, okay. 9-horse field, and our final horse on the outside is Max Player. Max Player is a 4-year-old honor code colt. We studied him for last year's Derby, and now we've got to see what he looks like as a 4-year-old. So we've got a nice example of what he was and what he is now, how far he's come. I thought we had him profiled very accurately in last year's Derby. We didn't love him in that race, but we saw a lot of good traits. Max Player, I think from day one, has shown her dynamic power and physical talent. But he also, especially in the debut and some of the early races, he showed us considerable sensory efficiency issues that needed to be worked through for him to, get anywhere near the level he's at now.
Yeah. For a horse to optimize physical talent, you have to have a high functioning operating system, which is the psychology. The operating system runs the machine, and it's in control of how efficient that it is, and those things like that. And he had that. He had a lot of things bouncing around inside that bean of his for a while, and but he had a lot of power, and he still has that power. And his growth pattern has been, how would you consider it? He's been pretty steady since that time, from what we've seen.
I mean, I think the biggest issue was related to his sensory system and how he filtered stress, especially in new and challenging environments. And as we know, right when that gate pops, that is a new and challenging environment.
Well, you have to understand, to that point, Pete, for the gate, I wanted to bring this up, but it's really important. One of the hardest things for a horse to do is to be physically sedentary while your mind is going a zillion miles an hour. In other words, you're standing in that gate and you have to stand there. And at the same time, mentally, you're absorbing the entire environment. You're anticipating from training, the gate's going to open. You're trying to size up your competitors to the left and to the right, and and everything that's going on around you. So your mind and body can be disconnected when that gate opens up. I mean, you can be thinking about one thing, and the gate opens up, and you have to all of a sudden shock yourself back into action. And you can see that happen a lot of times with. We'll freeze frame, or we'll do a frame by frame analysis how a horse comes out of the gate to look for clues and which way the energy is bouncing around in there, and the gate opens up. Where that energy is being distributed, oftentimes the body goes or follows through.
And we can see that Max Player's mind was going in a lot of different directions for
like a pinball.
A lot early in his career, because he would come out of the gate, he would be head high, he'd be lathered, he would lose position, and he would lose a lot of position early, and it basically created a pattern of motion that actually wasn't natural for the horse, but because of his sensory issues, he turned into a one-run closer. He would fall way back at the start, and he would have no choice but to filter out over a long period of time, and then eventually the rider would ask him to go, and you're probably rallying wide at that point, and you're probably too far back. And that was really the story of Max Player's career all the way through the Preakness.
I mean, if you think about it, there's a prime example, when someone says to me, well, how important is sensory efficiency? Well, let's consider how important and how disruptive sensory inefficiency is. And there's your example.
Yeah, and I think it took Asmussen, who this horse was trained by Linda Rice, his first 5 races of his career. Asmussen got him right before the Derby. He runs 5th in the Derby, 5th in the Preakness. They rested him a little. They tried him in the Saudi Cup. They took the blinkers off that day. He ran 11th, beaten 24 lengths. But this year we've seen some progress, and it started in the Suburban, and that's just 2 races back. So this is a very recent development.
Yeah. He looks like he may, there's potential here for this horse to now be hitting a different growth pattern. Then and here's the thing. When you have sensory issues and what I call potholes and disruptions, especially when you have disruptive sensory lead changes, your growth pattern is going to be delayed. You're going to have trouble learning because you can't put the continuity of things coming together for you is just, especially in combat, the combat of competition is just too disruptive. You're learning in pieces, you're learning in fragments, and then you can't assimilate. You have trouble even adapting. But as time goes on and you get some maturity, you get some experience, after a while, those things can begin to knit together. Some horses, begin to blossom and hit their growth pattern when they're 4 years old because of this, and they have a lot of things to get through. He looks like he is starting to find some continuity.
Yeah, and whether it was maybe Asmussen changed his training, maybe the horse matured. I think jockey Ricardo Santana Jr. deserves a little bit of credit.
Sure, it's always a team effort. Yeah.
Well, basically, they asked him for a little bit of speed out of the gate, and the horse actually responded in the Suburban. Now that race was run over a sloppy sealed track, which Max Player absolutely loved. We sometimes talk about certain types of horses. They like that sloppy sealed track because they can just kind of bounce off it and not really think about it. It's not the same as a sticky mud track.
No. It's also important to keep in mind too, horses that do have sensory efficiency issues, they become this by proxy what we term as a physical filter. And so a physical filter filters his emotional stress physically. He needs to be moving to get himself back into a rhythm and to process that stress. So, helping him out of the gate, helping him with early issues by just pulling the trigger right away and getting him into a faster rhythm, it can help really diffuse what's going on mentally and put it into action and get him into some kind of physical motion. That helps him find comfort, because horses, a reward for a prey animal is comfort, and so it's not food, it's comfort. Predators like food, prey like to be comfortable. And you find a comfortable zone for him in which to express himself and put that into an athletic manner. It's a big help. It's a big help.
Yeah, and even if, I'm sure some of the riders in his earlier races, I could go back and watch them, they probably asked him for speed, but this time the horse was ready for it. He was second at the first call of the Suburban. He's never had that position in his life. And he tracked a moderate to solid pace up front, according to my notes. And although the final quarter in 26 flat, I'm not super impressed by, he beat a horse called Mystic Guide, who was making his return from the Dubai World Cup. He had won the Dubai World Cup. So that was a breakthrough win. We watched that race on the head-on. It was significant progress, but it wasn't impressive. I didn't see Max Player owning his space, but he did hit the wire with his nose in front of Mystic Guide. So I think he grew there. And then he comes back in the Jockey Club Gold Cup. And this is how I know the connections the light turned on for them too, because Santana visibly asked this horse for speed in the Jockey Club Gold Cup again. He made sure he got out of that gate. And in this race, he was pressing a slow pace from second place again. And we kind of see a new pattern of motion forming. He kind of built his platform there. He held on to his position. And he came home with a burst. I've got Max Player running his final quarter in the Gold Cup in 24:72, and he wins by 4 lengths. So this is new for this horse. It's significant progress. I still don't think he's a herd dynamic monster.
No.
And I think he'll be tested to work out a trip like that versus tougher, faster foes in the Classic. The fractions will be faster, and these horses aren't going to give space to him as easy.
But just as an individual,
noting that he's on an upward swing here,
right?
And if he were to somehow get some kind of reasonable tactical position and he was comfortable with the pace, I could see Max Player come running here and surprise some people and hit the board.
Right, and so we've been through the horses, and like I said before, all these horses have proven that they can win, and it's really hard to separate these horses sometimes, But in my top tier horses, the way I see it playing out, the way I wouldn't be surprised that it plays out, is that Medina Spirit comes in ahead of Nick's Go. And right now, I waver between Essential Quality and Hot Rod Charlie coming up for third. And I can make a case for either one. Because we're putting the blinkers back on Hot Rod Charlie, which I know will help him probably dramatically. But he's had 2 races without them. And so sometimes you need a readjustment period, just a hint of a readjustment period. But this is a heck of a race to hit that readjustment period. And I may be completely wrong with this. It may be just so small and it becomes insignificant. But considering the relentless power and emotional energy distribution of Essential Quality, I give a little nod to Essential Quality. And then, Hot Rod Charlie and him could be interchangeable to me, but I'm going to go Medina Spirit. I'm going to go Nick's Go. I'm going to go Essential Quality, and then I'm going to give it to Hot Rod Charlie under much debate mentally for my own self.
I hate trying to force an opinion into a race, because when I look at this race,
right.
I think 6 horses could win this race, honestly. Right. All the horses that are 8-1 or less in the morning line could win, but the ones that I really think are the major win contenders. Nick's Go is a win contender. I don't like him as the favorite in this race, and that's because A, he's trying a new distance for the first time, and B, I don't think he's versatile. So he's not my top pick. I might be picking with my heart here a little bit because I really like Hot Rod Charlie as a horse, but I'm going to make him my top pick. I think he sits just a little bit off the pace. I think he gets first run. I'm expecting Medina Spirit and Nick's Go to duel. I think Hot Rod Charlie gets first run on the rest of the field. And if the improvement in physical speed that he showed in the Pennsylvania Derby is paired with an improvement in efficiency due to the blinkers going back on, I could see him running the race of his lifetime here and winning the Breeders' Cup Classic.
Yeah.
No matter what happens, I love Essential Quality to come running with his grinding energy and get a piece with this. I would not be surprised if Medina Spirit won. I think he can win. but his form is just a little bit up and down for me. And the things that have been going on with Baffert, where his horses are potentially being looked at more closely and maybe tested differently than the other horses, it just gives me pause. But I do think Medina Spirit is a really cool horse that I respect a lot. And if he were to win this race, I hope he gets the respect he deserves, because I think he's a really cool horse. And at the beginning of this year, Bob Baffert, I don't know how many horses he had in his barn. Maybe he had 20 or 30 or 40. This is not the one that was supposed to end up in the Breeders' Cup Classic, regardless of vet procedures or medications. He earned his spot here, and he is a really special horse for sure.
He is. And going back to Hot Rod Charlie, part of me I can see the scenario taking place that you described. I can see him, because in one of my footnotes with him earlier is like, it's better to be the hunter than the hunted. And I think in his case, I think he has potential to hunt down that if the top two get tangled up and they grind it out, he can pounce, and he certainly has that ability. So and
then he becomes the hunted as a central.
And then he becomes the hunted.
Somebody else comes running at him.
Timing is everything. So we'll see how it plays out. I mean, for me, I don't lay a bet. I study the horses. I love to study the horses. I love the herd dynamics, and that's my passion. I just want everybody to have a good, safe trip, and I look forward to studying these horses as we go forward. That's what I like to do. To me, the beauty of the horse is the emotional attachment that we have, and discovering. We know what they are, but discovering who they are, and who they are, and how that translates. Like I said before, these are emotionally driven athletes, and you really need to nurture the horse as you develop the athlete. And I think that's what makes it special. And really, horses can touch us all, not from what they do, but from that connection that we have with them mentally and emotionally. So for me, that's my passion.
Absolutely. And I'd ask anybody who's interested in our work, go to our website, click on Big Race Analysis, and you can get more examples of how we look at horses, their mental, emotional traits, their personality traits. And, it's a different way of looking at horses that Kerry and I have a passion for. We view this as a research project that's ongoing. Mm-hmm. We're always learning. So thanks again for everybody who showed interest in our work and supported us. And thank you to ABR for giving us this platform to share our thoughts on the horses in the Breeders' Cup.
We really appreciate it. And you can find us both on social media. Pete is at Pete Denk on Twitter. I'm at Thomas Herding on Twitter. I'm also Facebook. There's a THT Bloodstock Facebook page, and I'm on there as well. And hey, if you have any follow-up questions, or you want to chat, or you have any horses you want us to look at, let us know.
Is a special thing to see it come to Del Mar, and for Del Mar to be put on the world stage. And it seems like fans, not only from around the country, but around the world, have really gravitated to this event.
So glad you could join us in this beautiful Southern California afternoon. Pristine conditions for championship racing. What this event is all about. Championship.